It was a pretty stark and scary morning. We signed all the docs, we wired the money. In most restaurant deals, there's going to be a true up on the day of closing for the value of inventory in the restaurants, the day you acquire them, cash in the safes, things like that. Met the seller after he kind of went around and completed that work, and he told me what to make a check out to him for that remaining amount, and he handed me a master key and a sheet, like you said, of a bunch of safe codes and whatnot, and I'd asked him to congregate the 7 general managers together so I could kind of make an intro speech. And I don't know or remember if the seller did a sort of farewell speech to them before I got there, but when I got there, it was sort of like, hey guys, this is Mike, he's the owner now, see ya.
I'd love to start with Wingstop. Specifically, what was the deal size and how did the Wingstop deal come together?
I'd been searching with 2 buddies for a much larger acquisition in kind of any restaurant franchise brand. We came to think Wingstop was the most exciting brand for a ton of reasons we can get into. Approached Wingstop's corporate development team, and I would say they were sort of in the middle of receptiveness. They didn't say, get the hell out of here, but they didn't say, great, we're so excited, let us roll out the red carpet for you. They gave us the contact information of a 7-unit franchise owner in Ohio who they said maybe could be a seller, and we reached out to him, met him, and over the course of probably 7 or 8 months, kind of worked our way to a transaction. He actually originally chose a different LOI over ours. That person did not end up clearing Wingstop's approval process, and it came back around to us.
So how did you, there's kind of 2 questions there, dealing with the franchisor and then also competing for the deal. How did you get in touch with the Wingstop corporate initially as someone who hadn't owned franchises previously?
My recollection for Wingstop specifically is that we did it through my former partner's finance roles. Both of them were at hedge funds, had covered consumer stocks, including Wingstop, and reached out to the investor relations team to get a connection to somebody on the franchise development team.
Okay, cool. So a nice personal connection there. And then as far as the deal with the franchisee, 7-unit deal, I mean, Wingstop, national brand, the past 4 or 5 years in particular, it's been absolutely dominating.
Crazy, yeah.
I got to imagine there was a lot of competition for that deal. So were you willing to pay up, or like how did you compete in that basically versus I'd imagine there's other Wingstop franchisees also bidding on this?
I don't know that it was that competitive. Obviously, there was at least one other bidder. There wasn't a broker deal or anything like that. The seller was young but pretty sophisticated and had been a multi-unit franchisee in some other national brands before. I think the biggest piece of it is just Wingstop in 2018. Our timing was super fortunate, and it wasn't until post-COVID when Wingstop, it started getting a lot more attention. And so really timing is probably the biggest reason that wasn't a crazier deal. Seller was certainly a tough negotiator. I think the business we thought had somewhere around $700K of EBITDA, and we were paying around 6x for it, and it probably had more like 600 and we paid more like 7x. Getting the brand right makes up for a lot of other mistakes.
Yes. So high 6-figure EBITDA there. And what was, let's call it after the deal. Can you walk us through what is that like? Is the seller, I mean, is he giving you the codes to the lock boxes? Is it literally he's gone and all of a sudden employees report to you if they're sticking around, or maybe some left because they're like, hey, we've been working for this guy for a while, we don't know you?
Yeah. It was a pretty stark and scary morning. We signed all the docs, we wired the money. In most restaurant deals, there's going to be a true up on the day of closing for the value of inventory in the restaurants, the day you acquire them, cash in the safes, things like that. So met the seller after he kind of went around and completed that work, and he told me what to make a check out to him for that remaining amount, and he handed me a master key and a sheet, like you said, of a bunch of safe codes and whatnot, and I'd asked him to congregate the 7 general managers together so I could kind of make an intro speech. And I don't know or remember if the seller did a sort of farewell speech to them before I got there, but when I got there, it was sort of like, hey guys, this is Mike, he's the owner now, see ya. And that was sort of the the next step. He was not like engaged at all. There was no consulting agreement or anything like that post close. That said, he's a good guy in general, and so if I called him and asked a question, he was certainly happy to help out. But he wasn't doing anything significant after the transaction closed.
Yeah, in retrospect, I want to do like a full retro because obviously now today you're fully out of the deal after growing that portfolio. But is that something you'd recommend structuring as part of your deal? Like some, not an earn out, but just some time period where the seller's, he's almost obligated to pick up the phone if you have questions? Or is it just no, like you got to figure it out on your own and get moving?
It's extremely valuable to have. I'm not sure that there's a great way to structure it because I don't think you need or probably even want their continued involvement in any sort of operational talking directly to employees anymore stuff. It's more you want to know, hey, can you remind me who that vendor was that used to take care of this, or this person quoted me Y for something. Is that what you're used to paying, or whatever it may be? And I don't know that that's something you can really create a financial structure to incentivize. I think either the person is helpful and willing to do that or not, and hopefully you can figure that out during due diligence. In my case, I also think it varies depending on the size of the business you buy and what infrastructure comes over. I inherited a district manager who had been sort of running the business day to day for the seller. So he carried with him 90% of that knowledge, certainly as it related to all aspects of operating the restaurants. The areas where he couldn't speak to what had been done in the past for more on the kind of CFO, HR, payroll, accounting, those types of questions. And that's where the seller was most helpful.
And as far as, I'm sure now, even though it's been a little while since you sold, like your knowledge of Wingstop operations is far and away anyone else who's never been a franchisee. So, can you kind of tell us, because we get searchers who are interested in getting into blue chip QSR brands, and what are the things that you didn't see as far as what it takes to own and operate these things? Because, if I walk in as a customer, it's like I'm going to look at the menu, I'm going to order wings, I'm going to get wings, maybe some fries. But when you acquired this as the owner, like, are you having to get into the nitty gritty of staying on top of people to make sure that the wings get made? Or is that, it's no, like that part's an autopilot, but I didn't see landmine X, Y, and Z behind the scenes. What are the things where you're like, whoa, this is on my to-do list every day or every week all of a sudden?
It's usually going to depend on the size of the business that you buy. Let's say you buy a single location. That location has a general manager, a team, nobody else is coming over with that business. So there's a very real likelihood that over the first several months of operating, something will happen and the general manager will do something they're not supposed to. They won't show up for work, you name it. And if you've owned that one unit, that general manager doesn't show up for work, doesn't, discipline somebody, causes a problem themselves, whatever, buck stops with you. If the doors are closed and they're not answering their cell phone and you don't know the phone numbers of all the employees at the store, how are you going to call anybody and get them to show up? Like, you need to be able to do everything. Let's say you buy 4, 5, 6, 7 units and there's an area manager that kind of comes over in the deal, or you hire one quickly. They hopefully can handle more of that first response day-to-day customer complaint, delivery truck didn't show up, important piece of equipment broke, etc. But they've got a lot of responsibility overseeing multiple stores, and so if one of those issues requires them to run over and be all hands on deck at one store and then something happens at another store, again, buck stops with you. And so I think people are not prepared or don't understand going into it as much how big you have to be before you have infrastructure that lets you as an owner not need to be responsible for a lot of those things. And small things can really spiral. The fryer's broken and the fryer repair company says we can't get to you until 4 p.m. today. What do? You can't serve food. You have to turn off online ordering. You have to figure out if you're paying the team to stick around all day or sending them home. You have to communicate with corporate and give them a heads up of what's going on so they're not wondering why you've got a restaurant closed in the middle of the day. You probably have to refund some orders that came through that you didn't catch before you were able to notify people that the restaurant was closed. And that's just a long list of administrative stuff that a lot of it is not going to be done by someone in the four walls of the restaurant. You need that area manager, that VP, that COO, that you as the owner ready to step in and handle. And those things can't wait. So when I hear, I know something you want to talk about is people leaving, or maybe not leaving, trying to do this on the side of a full-time finance consulting operating role, whatever. I would tell you there's absolutely no realistic way to do that if you expect your location to run well.
Yeah. And as far as, these mishaps that can happen, the fryers breaking or whatever the case may be, even back to just like kind of the original question of taking over the stores from the seller and then, it's all on you. I mean, how much is the franchisor involved with you as a new owner? Especially, it's interesting because of Wingstop's scale, right? Are they contacting you saying, is there like a boot camp that you're going through? Did you still do a training? Or in the fryer example, is there like a protocol where they already have these things like, hey, if this happens, here's the steps to take?
So my experience is obviously only limited to Wingstop, but I would say not hugely in terms of any operational resources. Certainly nothing that's going to wave a magic wand and make it all better. They might be able to tell you, here's a contact at the major fryer repair company that you can reach out to, but they're not getting them there any faster or anything like that. They might drop by and kind of ask you, hey, like, why don't we go over some of your policies and procedures and we'll give you some thoughts on how those are working out based on what we see in the data, but they're not then going to solve all your problems if stuff's not working well. In the case of Wingstop, generally they require new franchisees to do a 1-month training program. It's the same training program they put corporate general managers through working at one of their stores in Dallas. And I chose to do that program because I wanted to show up with some idea of how the restaurant was supposed to run, but Wingstop was not going to require me to do that program because we were retaining the area manager who had been sort of successfully doing that role for the previous owner. I'm super glad I did that program. Like first day on the job, you walk into a restaurant, you see somebody making garlic Parmesan wings the wrong way, and I'm confident enough now to say, hey, that recipe doesn't look the way I think it's supposed to look. Can you tell me how you made it? I'm pretty sure the recipe is this, not that. Why don't we go back and look at the operations manual together and we'll see. And I would have been much more timid and sort of I wouldn't have known to even call anything out on that if I hadn't done that.
I think just from all the franchisees I've spoken to over the years, I mean, for one, like you said, just so you can stay on top of operations, it's critical. But then even secondly, I think there's a second order effect there where employees will probably have a lot more respect for you if you actually know what the heck's going on versus just being the guy in ivory tower. So let's talk about just quickly, because I know the stores were in Ohio. I believe you previously had a job in New York. Do you want to kind of just set the stage too for what you were doing professionally before you actually became the owner of these Wingstops?
The really fast resume is a few years in venture capital out of college to business school to a attempted effort to buy any sort of small business kind of in a search fundy format that did not succeed, to a real estate operating and investing role, and then quit that role to buy the Wingstops.
And if I'm not mistaken, you lived in New York while still owning those, while running the Wingstops in Ohio, right?
I moved out to Ohio after buying the Wingstops and was there full-time for the first 2 years. And then in 2021, started going back and forth, a couple weeks on in Ohio, come back to New York for a week, and kind of did that progressively until selling in 2023.
Okay, so you physically moved, rented an apartment.
Had an apartment, yeah, moved furniture over there, all that stuff.
Well, I think it's an under-discussed aspect of all this is the personal sacrifice. So one of my favorite examples is the CEO of now a multi-hundred location restaurant platform of Little Caesars, Wingstops, Whataburgers, and a few others. He started in Texas with the Little Caesars, and he moved to this very small town, basically in the middle of nowhere in Texas for his first Little Caesars, and just lived in a motel for a year to run that thing and get it up and running. And so for you, I mean, where were you at personally? Because I know now you're married, but this is back in 2018. Did you have a girlfriend? Are you just, and this might sound ridiculous to some people, but there's a big difference from like the New York City dating market to Ohio. And as someone who has family ambitions, these things can actually play a role in the decision. So what was it like there?
No, it's a great question. I was single. I was 29, so that made it easier to move for sure. And I was 29, so the dating pool in New York hadn't seemingly been working that well so far. And right when I moved to Columbus, didn't know a soul who lived there. Went on some dates there as well, or went on a date there. And the first and only date I went on was with my now wife,
Wow.
who
Okay.
ironically not from Ohio, but was there for work-related reasons as well.
Was that though a drawback, or were you saying just where you were at in life, you were actually fine with a relocation? You clearly like you didn't have anything tying you down, like where some folks may have kids already and like they're in
Yeah.
school.
My original effort to search for a business was to only buy one around New York. I did not want to leave. All my friends were here, loved it.
Yeah.
I'm now back in New York. And had it not been for doing that search for 18 months, having it not succeed, going back to a job, not being happy working for someone else, I don't think I would have been willing to make the leap to move to Ohio. It was the buildup of all of those circumstances that sort of wore me down or convinced me that above and beyond anything else, I just wanted to run a business. And if it took moving to Columbus to do that, fine, let's give it a shot.
That totally makes sense, but still, even I think that's a step that a lot of people probably they definitely don't want to take it, but I think a lot of folks would bow out of the process if it's oh no, I have to move to a different state. I'm not doing that.
Well, I think I mentioned I originally looked at doing this with two partners who are still close friends, and the only reason they did not end up being involved in the business is that the company we bought was quite small and couldn't pay two, let alone three of us salaries on top of debt service and whatnot.
Yeah.
But both of them were probably more willing to move to Ohio than me, actually. But both of them were at hedge funds making a lot more money than me. And so that was, I think, the main reason that I ended up being the operator rather than either of them. And had it gone the other way, they each would have had as much or more success than I did. It was totally the differentiating factor was the willingness to take the plunge, not being more talented or making better decisions than someone else.
Okay. Well, let's talk about how did you, as far as the debt service. So, how did you structure the deal, and how did that play into? Because I believe the portfolio got to 20 by the time you sold it. Did you have any frameworks for deal structuring within this landscape? Is there a certain multiple you're looking to stay at, or a certain debt to income ratio where you feel comfortable with?
Well, we had originally thought we were going to end up with an SBA loan, and so you're probably more likely going to be dictated to the ratios that that lender is willing to do rather than you getting to pick where you want to stand. It just so happened that we found a lender, a conventional lender, who gave us essentially what was an SBA loan without the government guarantee, but it was similar rate, similar term, personally guaranteed, super covenant light, although not free of covenants. And we took that just because it was a little cheaper up front. We thought it was going to be more flexible, it was going to be faster to close. So no real frameworks when it came to that. Probably the financing framework that comes to mind is that loan also included a line of credit to open new restaurants. And the deal was essentially they would loan 80% of the cost of a new location when we wanted to open one, and we could call on that line for, can't remember how long, a couple years as we built out the stores we'd agreed to develop. We'd signed a 5-year, 5-store, 3-year development agreement when we bought the deal. And in that case, my framework was I had a leverage ratio in my head, or really a debt service coverage ratio in my head of where I wanted the business to be. And so the easiest way for me to adjust our total leverage was as we built new stores, I could choose to borrow 80% and max out the loan. I could choose to borrow 50%. I could choose to borrow nothing. And I sort of used that as a lever when I was feeling, ooh, things look a little tight right now. I probably shouldn't build another fully leveraged store, or oh, we're doing great right now. We could take on more debt. Let's be as aggressive as we can on this one. And what I was mainly optimizing around was Wingstop, notoriously, and probably the biggest reason people didn't dive into the franchise sooner, has had very variable food costs due to the change week in and week out in chicken wing prices. And so literally over 5 years, I think our cheapest food cost a month was around 32% of sales, and our most expensive was probably 43, 44. So that's the entire profit margin of most restaurants in that gap. And I was particularly concerned about, okay, I think the long run number is 37, but I need to be able to pay my debt when that goes from 37 to 42. So what is the right amount of leverage and debt payments to have that would get me comfortably through a period like that if it happened?
I mean, that is a crazy swing in your cost of goods. So this may be a good time to just talk about like your typical four walls of a Wingstop. Today, the revenue is 2.1 million, and I think they're targeting 3 million in the coming years, which is just crazy considering it's up from 1.6 million in 2022. But let's talk labor, because that's the other big component here for your prime costs. Was the labor at least able to remain at a consistent level?
Controlling labor is challenging. It was definitely the range of where labor would be was likely to be tighter than food costs. Like you should not see a 10 percentage point swing in labor period in and period out. But if our target was 22% of sales for labor, it pretty easily can creep up to 24% or 25, and it's probably not super likely to naturally fall below. It's more downside from people staying longer than they should, not being efficient about staffing than being understaffed, although that can happen too. And that is way more in your control. So yeah, it's super frustrating when food cost goes from 37 to 44, but if it's not because you are dropping a bunch of chicken on the floor and throwing it out, you just kind of, it is what it is. Whereas if you see your labor costs jump up by 2 percentage points, like that's the easiest 2 percentage points on your P&L to grab or to control versus anything else, because it's a big dollar amount that's directly within your control.
So beyond that, what was the management of labor like for you? Was the turnover insane? Was that like the biggest headache? I think a lot of folks, when they think about QSR, the people who don't even consider it, they don't, because they're just like, they hear the stories of labor turnover and they don't want to deal with it at all.
Yeah, that's the main reason far and away that I don't own the restaurants anymore. I got very fed up with dealing with that problem. Yeah, the labor environment was tough post-COVID and then pre-COVID, and then post-COVID became just an absolute nightmare because a ton of factors, but a lot of restaurants kind of bounced back and had booms. There were hiring booms in kind of all sorts of like e-commerce warehouse, like low skill, low wage type jobs, and made it super, super competitive for us. And fast food jobs are hard. You know, you're on your feet, you're hot, you're dealing with customers who might not treat you very well, you're not getting paid that well, and there's a lot of people that show up to those jobs that you'd probably rather not hire, but that's the pool that you're fishing in, and you've got to decide what you're willing to put up with and what's a deal breaker, and making those decisions day in and day out of, well, we could fire this person, they're not an above average employee that we'd like them to be, but if we get rid of them, it might take us 2 weeks to find someone who's about the same as this person, and so is the devil you know, sorry to refer to it that way, but like better than the one you don't. And those decisions are awful. It's really it's not fun. It's frustrating. You don't feel good about yourself making them. So it's super difficult. And it trickles both up and down throughout the organization. So if you put yourselves in the shoes of a really good general manager, they can get very burnt out and frustrated if they're not able to get candidates in the door that will listen to what they want them to do. And so I saw really good general managers burn out because they didn't have a workforce that they could motivate to do the things they wanted them to do. So that's kind of pressure kind of coming down. And then similarly, like pressure going up, had area managers as we grew who supervised 5 restaurants, and let's say 3 of them had major labor issues that needed to be resolved. Well, when a restaurant has major labor issues, chances are the district manager overseeing them is going to need to step in and help out with a lot more functions of the restaurant. And so their job gets much, much harder. They can't focus on the things they want to focus on. They get burnt out. So just kind of throughout the employee base, people not showing up, not doing what they're asked, and not having a ready pool of replacements makes everyone's jobs a lot less fun and makes people a lot more likely to turn over.
It's an underrated, like, difficult job to be a fast food on the front line worker, where you're making the food, like you said, it's hot, and you're getting angry customers, and there is so much competition from so many different concepts, and even outside of QSR for similar wage level positions. So even despite this all, though, you still grew the portfolio to 20 locations. How are you able to do that, I guess, which is the easiest way to say it, but like specifically, what was the sequencing? Because you said as part of the deal, you agreed to build 5 new stores, I think, in 3 years.
Yeah. So I believe the order was we built 4, which got us to 11. We bought 7, which got us to 18. We built 1. We bought 1. I think that's the kind of order. The answer to your
Yeah.
question on like how is that able to happen is that throughout this period, Wingstop is putting up 25, 30, 35, 40% same store sales growth each year. And so those original restaurants that we bought doing kind of 750K AUVs were doing $1.5 million AUVs at the time we sold them. That growth and the incredible returns on building new restaurants continue to pay for all the other ones.
That was something I was going to get to later, but we might as well talk about it now. From your vantage point, I mean, why is that happening within Wingstop specifically? Because it really is one of the strongest brands and one of the craziest growth stories in the whole QSR landscape. Why is Wingstop just on an absolute tear over the last few years?
I wish we had understood this better and been more aggressive in 2018, but from 2018 to 2023, every year we got some pretty meaningful new change or addition to the system that kept this flywheel spinning on top of just the general model, which I'll get to in a second. So 2017, I think I have my years right here, Wingstop did not run television advertising. They thought the advertising budget was too small. 2018 was the first year that they started doing targeted ads around NBA playoffs or major sporting events. 2023, I believe, was the first year Wingstop just ran year-round TV ads like every other brand. And so the brand awareness jump that you get from going from no TV ads to constant year-round TV ads, huge leap for brand awareness and sales. Similarly, Wingstop 2019 introduced delivery, which became a huge part of the business through DoorDash. So that was a huge lift. By the time I sold, about a third of our sales came through delivery channels. 2020 COVID, my best explanation for that is just Wingstop's a really high quality product, genuinely great chicken wings. And I think a lot of people stuck at home with their families looking for something new. Let's give Wingstop a try. It's an easy takeout or delivery item to order. We've had enough burgers and pizza, so we got exposed to a lot of new customers there. 2021 and 22, Wingstop introduced chicken sandwich, which was a product a lot of people had been clamoring for. I think that was 22. 21, they probably expanded Uber Eats and some other delivery partners, and anything else I'm missing. So just all of these kind of big sea changes in just how Wingstop worked. And then behind the scenes of all of this is this flywheel, which is why looking at the ROI on new builds of any concept you're considering getting into is so important. Wingstop cost $400,000 to open one. Let's say when we got into it, you were going to make $100,000 just to make the math easy before debt. So it's a 25% unlevered cash on cash return. It was probably higher than that even back then. Well, now when one of these big new things happens, sales go up in your restaurant due to marketing, due to delivery, whatever, restaurant becomes more profitable, that 100 or 125 becomes 150. Restaurant still costs 400,000 to open, so the unit economics get even more attractive. So what happens, people start becoming more aware of Wingstop and people start opening more Wingstops. As people open more Wingstops, that advertising budget gets bigger. The brand awareness just from knowing someone who's ordered at a Wingstop, driving past on your way to work, that gets bigger. So now more people come. So now the sales go up again. So now the store level cash flow goes up to 160,000. The ROI gets even better. And that flywheel just spins and spins and spins. So roughly probably from when we bought to when we sold, they probably went from 1,000 domestic locations to 1,800 domestic locations. And that both is evidence of that flywheel and driving that flywheel.
That's a great explanation on just like the positive flywheel within franchising that can take place. And even the numbers and kind of the brand awareness, it reminds me of Jersey Mike's to a degree. In the last 10 years has kind of gone through. They're opening more locations than ever. Their revenue has increased quite a bit on a per store basis. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And that's why the ad fund can be a major positive for franchisees. So I'm curious, even at the scale you got to, just to bring it back to the labor and what it's like as the operator, right? Am I right? Is it 17 units or 20 units the portfolio was out by the time you
20.
sold? Okay. And even at that scale, because I think this is good for people to understand, at that scale, you still weren't feeling like you were even close to being removed from the headaches of if someone calls out sick or someone just doesn't show up, right? Like you don't have enough layers where you can kind of,
Yeah,
again, just
no,
not having to
that's
get dragged.
definitely how I felt. And our structure at that point was 5 district managers, each overseeing 4 locations. They reported into a vice president of operations. Working with him was a HR/controller person, and she had an outsourced Philippines-based assistant, and then me. And I still had plenty of stuff to do just to help provide leverage. It wasn't like I was needed. I could go away for a month and they didn't need me for 99% of the decisions that were going to be made in that month, but they were working really hard in my absence. Things would build up that required, in my opinion, my input, whether that's lease negotiation, site selection, thorny HR issue, like stuff like that. Could I have maybe hired 2 or 3 more people and just sort of overstaffed and then said, cool, you guys now have enough resources to tackle all this stuff. I'm going to peace out. Maybe from like a financial perspective, that was possible, but you got to remember or put yourself in the shoes of if you're 33 years old, you now have a meaningful paper net worth, but it's illiquid in one company in a notoriously challenging industry. Are you going to take all that money, give it to a different group of people and say, you guys are responsible for all of my money while I go do something else? Like, I don't think anybody's going to make that decision. Not to mention that we had a development agreement with Wingstop to keep opening restaurants at a pretty fast scale at the time I decided to sell. A lot of the people who were working at our company were attracted to it because we were growing quickly and they saw opportunities to rise from GM to district manager to a regional manager, etc. And if I suddenly told them, hey, you guys are in charge of the company, but I'm not going to reinvest it anymore, you guys just kick the cash flow back to me every year, I think a lot of those people would have been on the market looking for new jobs because there were plenty of other places they could have gone that were growing and we're going to give them those opportunities.
There's certainly ripple effects to whichever path you take. And when you did sell, for whatever you're willing to share, what did the portfolio look like compared to when you bought it? Again, so whatever you're willing to share, if it's EBITDA, unit count, revenue.
Yeah, I mean, at the high level, we'd gone to like a run rate of 30 million in revenue, and EBITDA was kind of a question for the buyers because back to that food cost issue, the year before I sold, food cost had been as bad as it had ever been, and the quarter that I sold it was as good as it had ever been. So you could have looked at it as having anywhere from like sub 2 to 6 plus of EBITDA, depending on what you thought food costs were. So super tricky to say what the actual number was, but it was definitely a healthy, super profitable business that owned a lot of development territory, but it was also one that still had a ton of labor challenges. We're far from where we wanted to be on our customer service metrics. And yeah.
And what was it like then during the sale process? Was that a long process? Were you targeting a big fish within the Wingstop system? Was it an outside buyer?
It was a very fast process, and I strongly suspected that we would sell to a new franchisee who had been waiting for a chance to get into the Wingstop system and start with some scale. We certainly had a lot of interest from people with that profile, and in the end, 2 of the 3 final bidders would have been new franchisees. The third was a large existing franchisee. Unsurprisingly, they were the lowest of the 3 bids, but they were also a group that knew the brand that I knew from the last 5 years of just kind of collaboration among brand partners, and that Wingstop was super supportive of. And so went back to them and said, look, there's a discount that you guys deserve for being a buyer. I know we'll close easily and quickly, but it's not quite the discount that you're proposing with your current offer. Can you come up at all? And they agreed on a number that worked.
I take it then if they already knew the system, it was probably a similar handoff as to the one that you took over from the original owner in Ohio.
I wish I could have done the handoff like they did. So when I bought the business, I showed up for that meeting. Was, hey guys, I'm Mike. Nice to meet you. I'm in charge now. When they showed up, they were able to send 12 corporate people to the market for several days straight to onboard, meet the new employees, took them to a baseball game, gave them swag, and it was
Holy
like an
crap.
awesome experience that they created. They own, I don't know, seven, eight, 900 restaurants or something across a bunch of different brands. But like, I didn't have the resources to do that as great of a move as it was on their part. So, and I remember during the transaction, they send me all their due diligence questions and stuff like that. And I'm like, here's the login codes for all the security cameras in an Excel spreadsheet. And they're like, oh, you could send that to our loss prevention team. They had multiple people whose only job it was to manage security cameras and safe codes and movement of cash and all that stuff. And it's like, that would have been a really nice team to be able to afford. We had a general manager like on his iPhone scrolling through security footage when we had issues trying to figure out what happened.
Are you able to share the name of the company that bought it, or like is it?
Yeah, Sizzling Platter.
Oh, it was Sizzling Platter. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Holy crap. Yeah, I mean, well, that's good timing too, because they just did that deal with Bain for over
Yep.
$1 billion. Any just interesting nuggets there as far as because you were talking about you, right? Who in the game for 5 years, which is a long time, right? That is a long time to be in the thick of things, and obviously did a great job, right? You grew the portfolio from whatever it was, 4 or 5 million to 30 million, and you're talking about though maybe signs of burnout to a degree, and then you have a
Yep.
group like Sizzling Platter, which maybe it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison, right? Because I think they were started in like the 1960s or 70s. But how is a group like that able to scale to that point where, I mean, we're talking about layers of management, right? I mean, you just mentioned a loss prevention team. Like, that's crazy. For a company that owns QSR restaurants, they're probably 10 to 15% net margins, and they're funding all these ridiculous G&A expenses effectively. What is the difference there of a group that can like really scale to that point?
I think that one of the best things you can do if you can get to this point is have those crazy G&A resources, because the fewer G&A resources you have, the more stuff gets pushed onto restaurant teams, either district managers above store or GMs in store, who that's not their core competency. If you want to troubleshoot like internet issues, you might have a phenomenal restaurant operator who's not particularly tech savvy, and it takes them 3 hours on the phone to figure out how to reboot an Ethernet or a router or something like that. And so, yeah, it sounds maybe superfluous to have like a corporate IT team, a corporate loss prevention team, a corporate this or that, but like the more stuff you take off their shoulders, not just in the amount of hours that you free up for them to do restaurant related tasks, but the mental load that you take off their shoulders. They don't have to do every single thing every day and be able to do that. They can focus on getting the core big things right. Like, that's a more attractive place for those people to work. They're going to be able to do better work with that support. So just, I think that's magical. As far as how they grew, maybe it's a good time to touch on, in retrospect, as a person who did not have outside funding, made decisions with the very clear knowledge that this is coming directly out of my pocket, and it doesn't matter how much education you've had and how many spreadsheets you can run, it is a lot harder to make smart long-term financial decisions when they very immediately and in the short term very directly impact your take-home pay. And so if I was running the same 20-unit business with an investor group, I think the investor group would have said, Michael, let's up our burn, spend more money on this GA, use that to improve our operations, build all these new restaurants. We know they're going to be positive investments. We'll scale in advance so you're not kind of chasing to catch up. And 5 years from now, we'll own this great 40, 50, 60 unit business, and that G&A will be really reasonable. And like, that makes perfect sense. But when you're living it and you have to make all those investments and bear all that risk, it's not as easy to make that decision.
Having the capital to enable a long-term, like that long-term mindset where you can take your time and build things is, if you don't have it to begin with, like you said, it's just so difficult. So,
And I'll tell you a super underrated piece that I didn't appreciate. When you're the sole owner of the company and everybody knows that, they know very directly in a conversation about, I want to raise, I want to spend money on this, here's the financial status of the business, that it's, if I don't give somebody $1 an hour raise, it's I'm keeping that dollar an hour for myself. And that's a very uncomfortable position to be in versus having the boogeyman of, well, I have investors in a board and this is the budget that they approved and this is what we have to stick to and whatnot. It's didn't have any of those people to blame things on, which would have been nice sometimes.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's all on your shoulders when you're the sole operator. And I'm sure not every employee has the full vantage point. So they might think, oh, I'm busy from the time I walk in to the time the store closes. Like, we must be making so much money and I can't even get an extra dollar an hour. Whereas you're crunching numbers to shave off a point here and there and maybe pay down some debt service and whatnot. So it's definitely a really tough spot to be in. And as far as looking back on where this whole ETA movement is going versus where it started, I'd say during COVID, it really just heated up. I think people being home for a long time, I don't know if it was too much time to like surf the internet and get some bad ideas or good ideas. But what do you think about it? Is it everything it's cracked up to be? Well, obviously, I'll dial down into franchising specifically, but just the ETA movement in general. I mean,
I, for the last 2.5 years, have been full-time investing in this space, so I'm broadly super excited and super bullish on it. It is a huge world that spans everything from someone going out and buying a business with $200,000 of cash flow in their local community and sort of buying themselves a job and a chance to be their own boss, to people putting together $20 million committed capital vehicles to do consolidations in industries and growing really fast and everything in between. So it's hard to speak about that all with sort of one brush. But I think that the main thing I would say is when you're getting into it, know where you would like to end up from a financial and personal lifestyle perspective, and spend a lot of time thinking about, is the path that you're taking one that is reasonably likely to lead you there. So if you would be super thrilled to own a couple locations that make $500,000 a year and you work 30 hours a week just kind of taking care of stuff and you deal with annoying problems, but like you clip a great amount of money and have a pretty solid lifestyle, like there's a lot of franchise opportunities that might be super interesting to you. But if your goal is to be making $5 million a year or build a $100 million enterprise value company, A, you're not going to do that with 30 hours a week lifestyle jobs. B, you probably do not want to start by buying a couple franchise locations unless you've got a 30-year time horizon for doing this. So there are just like lots of different paths people might take to achieve their goals, and like they're all great, and some of them merit outside investment and some of them don't, and some of them are focused on lifestyle and some of them aren't, and it's all good and great.
have you developed a specific focus within the ETA landscape? Because you're right, it's a crazy spectrum out there. Have you backed franchise operators, or have you developed your own thesis of this is the kind of operator and capital structure that I think works best or that I'm most comfortable putting my money?
I have focused on doing traditional search funds and kind of committed capital or like independent sponsor type deals where the entrepreneur is full-time running that business, but I've stayed out of the kind of sub $5 million EV market where people are using SBA loans and raising smaller amounts of capital and whatnot. And I'd say that the two sort of main reasons for that are A, the SBA self-funded terms that investors usually get, I don't think are super attractive. And B, small companies are super risky and you might do great on a pay down debt, grow the business a little bit, etc. But I think in almost all those deals, you're taking the 5, 10, 20x things off the table, and you're looking more at you can generate a good IRR a couple of times your money, that type of thing. But businesses that start off super small are that much harder to grow into something really big. And so I'm a little more attracted to the bigger scale things.
Totally. It makes sense from an investor standpoint that obviously like you want the best chance of something to turn into as much of a home run as it can be. And yeah, the smaller the base is at the start, it's harder to get that kind of major momentum going. Would you personally do things differently with Wingstop going back, or are you happy with how you played it?
The number one thing I would do differently is I would have played the game with the franchisor a little bit more early on. I would be told, hey, the regional vice president's coming through to check out some of your restaurants. Can you take him around for the day? And my attitude was just sort of like, he can, happy to meet him, but like he can do whatever he wants. Go visit the restaurants, have at it. And I got some advice of like, no, like you got to put on a show and make sure those restaurants are on point and like da 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 da. And I just hated that advice and didn't believe it because to my mind, like that person in that role's got to know that people are putting on a show and that this is not necessarily representative of what the restaurant is. And I'd rather them just see this is reality. This is what I'm dealing with. We're not doing everything perfect, but hopefully if they talk to employees, like they'd see that we care and we're working on stuff and whatnot. And the reality, surprisingly, is that like you got to play that dog and pony show and kiss a lot of butt. And I was not willing to do that. And I think had I been willing to do that, I probably would have had a few more growth opportunities a little more my way.
Fascinating. If you have the personality to do it, that's one thing. But if you don't, then I mean, there's no point in trying to fight against the current, I say. But when you think about just others who, because we get inbound via FranDawgs all the time, people who they want to get into franchises, they want to buy big QSR brands. And you were kind of mentioning earlier the time horizon you need to really build something big. There's sort of these outliers in the franchising world, whether it's a Greg Flynn or Guillermo Perales, right? These guys who have been at it for 20, 25 years. I mean, Greg Flynn, 4 billion plus in revenue. Guillermo's over a billion. Those are, again, obviously exceptions to the rule. But if someone's trying to get into one of these blue chip QSRs, what do you think is like a realistic outcome in, let's say, a decade, right? If you play your cards, how big can you get these things?
I really don't know how to answer that question. Yeah, there are just so many different variables that go into it. Like Taco Bell over the last few years, absolute top tier brand that everybody wants to get into it. People are paying really high prices to get into it. And I have my framework for being excited about restaurants like back then was you can buy these things at pretty cheap prices for how good and durable they are. But like paying 9 to 10 times cash flow doesn't quite feel such a cheap price for restaurants. I think there are better investment opportunities at that price in other types of businesses. And so could you build something huge in Taco Bell because it's a great brand that seems to keep getting things right? Sure, but does paying 9 or 10 times make it a hell of a lot harder? Definitely. On the flip side, you could make a bet on a brand like Papa John's that's like more down on its luck and think that they're going to bring in different leadership or leadership's going to come up with a new playbook and that's going to kind of turn things around and you're going to get in when things are a little depressed and you're going to capture the wave as things get better and buy distressed people or whatever. Like totally possible, but you got to call that Papa John's turnaround accurately. And if you don't, it works against you and you're one of the distressed people in a few years. So it's just so hard to say.
It's very brand dependent for sure. I guess maybe a better way of asking the question is just, is it a path you'd still recommend? You're right. If someone's saying, I either have a search fund or I'm going to lever up, do you still feel like it's all worth it, I guess? And I know, again, like let's try to ignore the minutia of, well, hey, what brand are you looking at? But
I absolutely think you could build a big QSR platform with a 10, 15, 20-year time horizon. I think the key thing for figuring out whether you can do that is like, can you show up every day excited about the problems that happen in restaurants and be as ready to tackle them on day 3,000 as day one? And if you can do that, there are not that many people who can and who want to.
Yeah.
And you'll definitely have something special to compete with.
That's really it. Yeah. I mean, you're eating glass every day, effectively. So if you can do that for a long time, that will.
I talked to somebody the other day who was interested in restaurant franchises, has spent a lot of time in restaurant environments, not necessarily in QSR, through like summer jobs and stuff, and was like, yeah, I love the hospitality and the food industry, and I think I really might want to get into this. And my answer to him was like, running a franchise in restaurants does not generally feel like running a food or a hospitality business. It feels much more like running a kind of assembly line or some sort of like very people intensive operation thing where the food just happens to be the output, but literally makes no difference whether you're frying chicken or cooking burgers to like what you're going to be doing day in and day out. And so I don't think people who are attracted to it for the I love food service aspect are necessarily getting what they think they might.
You got to know what business you're getting into. And yeah, I mean, you're spot on with kind of just what it really is like as the owner. And maybe zooming out a bit, I know for your process of even finding the Wingstop deal, you spoke to a lot of different brands. And I think it would be interesting for people just to hear whatever insights you can recall from back then. Because I know based on what we've talked about in the past that at a minimum you spoke to Wendy's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Jimmy John's, Taco Bell, McDonald's, and Domino's. And that's a lot of, and there may have been more, honestly. Those are the ones I know that you mentioned that, okay, I spoke to these guys.
And I mean, for us, like, talk to could have been as simple as, like, called them and they said, don't waste your time. It's not going to happen. Like, McDonald's. So I would say, I don't think there's necessarily that much value in, like, our experiences talking to these brands in 2017 because in a lot of them, leadership is going to have changed. The franchise base is going to have changed. I think that the important comment around this whole thing is each brand has different goals and priorities and different people preferences for who they are looking for and what they want them to do. So we doing this Wingstop consolidation, we're shamelessly following in the footsteps of business school classmates of mine, Alex Sloan and Matt Perlman, who now run a private equity firm, Garnet Station Partners, but it began out of a consolidation of Burger King and then Popeyes restaurants. And they were at the very forefront of giant, well-known tier one franchise system and Burger King deciding to refranchise and looking for young, sharp, well-capitalized people to come in and renovate their old restaurants and take out struggling franchisees. So that was a perfect match at that time. A few years ago, my general understanding was that while Burger King was still interested in that profile of people, a lot of the near-term low-hanging fruit in operational improvements and brand improvements and renovations and whatnot had kind of been scraped up by guys like Alex and Matt. And so while Burger King still wanted people like that, the financial opportunity wasn't necessarily there anymore. And so I think they were probably looking at different franchisee profiles as a result because it no longer made sense to be a young, well-capitalized, we'll go renovate all these restaurants group. Whereas when we talked to Buffalo Wild Wings, they were at the cusp of doing a refranchising. They ended up getting acquired by Rourke, and that put a stop to everything. I honestly haven't followed up on what they ended up doing on that front, but their priority today might be entirely different. Maybe they've decided that they want mom and pop operators who will own a couple restaurants and be super involved in the store all day long. I'm not sure. But that's kind of the game for you to figure out as an aspiring franchisee of one of these brands is what profile are you bringing to the table and which brands are looking for those types of people to become franchisees? Are they looking for people to take out old franchisees that have not reinvested in the brand? Are they looking for people who are aggressive developers to expand the brand? Are they looking for huge consolidators to take out a bunch of mom and pops? Who knows?
And I think what you're really hitting on there is you need to, because none of this stuff will be publicized for the most part. I mean, sometimes I think Subway recently made a big announcement where they're like, hey, like we're trying to actually let franchisees consolidate right now because they had so many units in general, but so many single unit and just small operators within this 30,000 at one point footprint just in the US alone. But yeah, you're really hitting on, you got to figure out where the momentum's swinging within the franchise at that moment when you're speaking to them. Are they in growth mode, or are they in meaning growth, meaning like new operators coming in, buying out old, or are they more preferential to the mom and pop style ownership model? Which, if you're hungry and young to grow a big portfolio, that's not a brand that's going to be a fit for you long term. So, yeah, no, that's really good advice. And as far as what you're up to today, I know you're ETA investing. Are you back in the financial hedge fund world, or is it mainly on the ETA side of things for you?
Yeah, no, just investing on my own. Technically, the firm or the website is called Streetlight Capital, but Streetlight Capital is really Michael Horowitz trying to have a trade name rather than a personal name. But investing in traditional search funds, long-term hold vehicles, entrepreneurial sponsored deals, again, kind of staying out of the SBA funded deal world, but anything other than that on the table. No particular focus on franchise. I am completely open to investing in a good franchise deal, and I've invested in a few franchisor deals. I have not yet invested in a franchisee deal, and it may be the case of I have too many scars and too critical of an eye given my experience compared to somebody else, but definitely happy to chat about those things. And so anybody who's got something that they would love to chat with me about, definitely ping me on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that, and happy to take a look.
Cool. We'll plug those in the show notes. And before we go here, is there a second act potentially ever in franchising at all, or from a more active operational standpoint?
In franchising as a franchisee, I would say pretty unlikely. I don't really intend to manage low skill, low wage labor workforces ever again. It's definitely possible that there's some very labor light franchise concepts or something like that maybe gets appealing, although I doubt that is with me as the operator. It's probably with me as an investor. Much more possibility on the franchisor side that something like that could be appealing. I definitely have an affinity for franchisees and think bringing that mindset to a franchisor would be helpful, but really the reality is I feel like I made my life sacrifices in terms of moving to a new city and not knowing anyone and stuff like that. And so now I'm optimizing for some more lifestyle things around where I want to live and who I want to talk to every day and whatnot, more so than trying to get in a CEO seat.
Totally. I would agree. I think you did your tour of duty and it was a success. So you've earned the right to be able to call your shots a bit more. Well, it's been fun, man. It's always good to catch up. And maybe if you do jump into a franchisor or something, we'll get you back on the pod to share part 2 of the Michael Horowitz journey. So yeah, but like I said, guys, we'll have his links in the show notes if you want to get in touch or just follow along, see what he's up to. But yeah, Mike, always
awesome.
Good to talk, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I should just add, you put out like super, super high quality content. And at this point, with the number of people you've spoken to and the time you've spent in the space, you know much more about a lot of this stuff than I do at this point. And so it's a nice service you're doing to people for putting it all out there. So kudos to you.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you. We'll talk soon. That's a pod.
Awesome.